put you in the need to know, and they practice to deceive. You can talk to me.
Is this working? Is this working okay? It is. Okay. Well, I want to explain how honored I feel to be following the mayor of Crawford and also my shipmate on the Audacity of Hope there in Athens last summer, where last time we saw our Icelandic friend. I have a couple of grandchildren spread out all over the U.S., but there are two that live in Oakland. One's name is Claire. And about 8 years ago, I was on a TV interview, and my wife had a chance to tell my daughter, hey, you might want to tune in. And so my daughter Kathleen and Claire are watching, and when it was over, Claire ran up to Kathleen, my daughter, and she said, well, Mommy, that was Grandpa. And Kathleen said, yeah. She said, well, Mommy, that means the other people are real too. Now that's real cute, isn't it? I mean, from a 4-year-old. But you know what? Think about that, folks. If you don't know somebody in the picture, the other people aren't real too. We don't even have pictures of what we're doing in Iraq, Afghanistan, or God forbid, Iran. So the point I want to make is that unless you have direct contact with human suffering, innocent human suffering, the other people aren't real too. And I see that that's what Bradley Manning had, that's what Dan Ellsberg had, that's what a lot of people that I so much admire have had, and explains why they were enabled, why they were empowered to speak out to prevent further innocent suffering. It goes all the way from Dan to, most recently, another Dan, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis, who has written that wonderful, that interesting thing about showing the corruption, showing the vanity of our top military leaders as they pretend to have progress. Of course, it's fragile and it's reversible, but it's progress, to quote the divine Petraeus. Now, those people are lying through their teeth, and they know it. And that's what makes me extremely, what's the word, sad, to see what's happened to the Army in which I was very proud to serve in the 60s. It's gone really downhill, and Lieutenant Colonel Davis has had the guts to blow the whistle. Why? Because he made trips throughout Afghanistan, because he served 2 tours in Iraq, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Well, that helped, of course, but he himself said on Amy Goodman, or was it RT, he said, look, he said, you know, I've been interviewing all these people and writing this paper, and then 7 of them got killed. 7 of them, my good friends, my interlocutors. So it's this immediate contact that makes a difference. Now, how was it with Bradley Manning? He was this young fella, 22. He's watching all manner of things go on in Baghdad. Not only that terrible collateral murder video, the effects of that Apache helicopter. You know, these bullets that helicopters fire are very much different from the ones that come out of rifles. He saw that, and more immediate and more to the point here, he witnessed young Iraqi university students being wrapped up by Iraqi police, furnished with our weaponry and our training, of course. For what? For writing a term paper critical of the Iraqi prime minister who we put in place. He watched that go on, and when he saw them thrown in Iraqi prisons, he knew what was going to happen to them, okay? He knew, as we all knew from watching the photos from Abu Ghraib. So he went to his commanders and said, hey, you know, Americans really shouldn't be countenancing this sort of thing. He said, hey, shut up, go home, finish your tour and forget about it. Forget about it. That's the whole thing. Well, he had a conscience, and he wasn't going to forget about it. Colonel Davis talks about, after all this investigation and seeing the top Army leaders were lying through their teeth. He doesn't say lying through their teeth, but that's what they were doing. He had a moral problem with that. Well, good for Colonel Davis, you know. We still can have moral problems with this kind of thing. So, in the correspondence that we have, Bradley Manning, this is all sort of supposed to be in the subjunctive case, in case Bradley was not the person who did this, but we have the correspondence indicating that he witnessed this kind of thing. He witnessed these young kids being wrapped up, police abuse. Police abuse, wow, you know, I think, where are we now? Right next to Oakland. You know, it seems to be contagious. I was actively involved, says Bradley Manning, in something that I was totally against. Wow. So why did he do it? This is what he said. I want people to see the truth. I want people to see the truth, because without real, authentic information, you cannot make informed decisions as a public. And he hoped for worldwide discussion, debates, and reform. Well, there are a lot of things stacked against that, but he has already achieved more than anyone could have expected, hasn't he? The Arab Spring and all kinds of other things that have been going on, things that have been disclosed about the abuses of our conduct in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Let's take Iraq. When he observed these abuses where Iraqis were torturing one another, he was seeing the effects of a policy laid in place in June of 2004. 2004. Remember 2004? Seems like so long ago, okay? April, what happened? 2004. Abu Ghraib. May, the only honest investigation of the abuses of Abu Ghraib by General Taguba, who was cashiered for doing an honest evaluation and saying the top brass was mostly to blame. June, we had Frago 242. Okay, how many know about Frago 242? I can't see any hands go up. Frago is fragmentary order, okay? And it came out of Washington with Petraeus and Dick Cheney behind it, and Petraeus implementing it. And it said, look, we ought not to torture other people anymore. If you see coalition folks torturing, tell them to stop. But Iraqi on Iraqi torture, well, you might want to report that to the Iraqi authorities. Hello, you know, you're going to report Iraqi torture to the people who are doing it? So that was the guidance, okay? That was the guidance. And that's what Bradley Manning saw back, or later, 3 years later, in 2007. He spoke out against it, he tried to get it stopped. Now, one of the most interesting things that comes out of one of the cables that was released to WikiLeaks is this Frago 242, and explains the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in Washington, and I've been here 49 years, the most bizarre thing I've ever seen at a Pentagon press conference presided over by the Defense Secretary, in this case Rumsfeld, my old pal, and General Peter Pace, Ramrod Strait General, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, okay? Now, in November of 2005, so we're talking April, Abu Ghraib, May, the investigation by Taguba, June, Frago 242, don't torture but let other people torture. A full year and a half later, November of 2005, it became clear to Western correspondents in Baghdad that the Iraqis were torturing the hell out of one another, okay? And this was done with confessional blessing, whether you were Shiite or Sunni. And so a lady asked at a press conference with Peter Pace and Donald Rumsfeld, well, General Pace, what are your instructions? What are your instructions for our troops when they see torture? Pace, they are to stop the torture on the spot. Whenever they see it, they have to do anything humanly possible to stop the torture on the spot. Those are my instructions. Rumsfeld. Well, General, I don't think you actually mean to stop it. You mean to report it. No, sir, I mean it to stop it. Hello? I couldn't believe my eyes, okay? Now, why do I raise that? Well, because Frago 242, revealed by one of the WikiLeaks cables, explained that the new instructions, years before, were, you see the Iraqis torturing one another? Forget about it. Don't worry about it, okay? That's not our business, okay? And then people saw the effects of that, and Peter Pace, he didn't know about it. He's only the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, folks, okay? He didn't know about it. And here's Rumsfeld telling him, a year and a half later, well, it's really not to stop it, General. It's to report it. Give me a break. Well, Pace was at least honest enough to call him on that. Of course, he didn't know that these were the new instructions. But Pace was short-lived in that job. He was one of the very few chairs of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who didn't get a second crack at it. I want to watch my time here. So that's just one kind of example of Bradley Manning's motivation here, in my view. The Apache helicopter thing was just gory and brutal as hell. But, seeing them flesh to flesh, seeing these young kids being wrapped up and put in prison was yet another thing. Now, Dan Ellsberg, as most of you know, was not only a Pentagon guru, he was a Marine. And even after he stopped being a Marine, he went out to Vietnam and slogged through those marshes and through the bogs there. So he knew about the innocent suffering of the Vietnamese people. And so that's why he was motivated to move well before the Pentagon Papers. And I'll tell you just a little story here that nobody knows, or very few people know. A colleague of mine, Sam Adams was his name. Actually, he was a direct descendant, 17 times removed, of John Adams, our second president. He was a CIA analyst, and make a long story short, he found out that General Westmoreland was acting in a corrupt way, and said that there couldn't be more than 299,000 enemy. So, communists under arms. And Sam Adams, my co-analyst at CIA, figured out that there were at least 500,000, maybe 600,000. He went over to Saigon, and he was completely confused because they didn't have any really comeback to justify their figures. Or, I mean, doesn't 299,000 sound a little suspicious to you? I mean, it's like buying a radio for $13.99, right? Okay, so this sergeant comes up to Sam in the bar that night. He says, "Yeah, Mr. Adams, I know you're all confused by this, but look, the general says we can't go over 299,000 because we've been killing so many of them. These correspondents there at the Follies in the afternoon there in Saigon, they're not real smart, but they can do arithmetic and everything. Okay, now I used to commiserate with Sam Adams because he couldn't get his story out. Every intelligence agency in Washington agreed with Sam Adams except the Army for obvious reasons. And the head of the CIA, Richard Helms, at the time, caved. Why? Well, he explained that his idea was that his chief mission was to protect the agency. And as he put it to Sam Adams, you don't protect the agency by getting involved in a pissing match with the U.S. Army when they're at war. So that's the kind of that's the kind of compromise the top generals have made ever since Westmoreland. Now, why do I mention some of this? Well, I mention some of this because when Sam's figures were unable to be produced in a national intelligence estimate, a fellow named Daniel Ellsberg got them. Okay, and as I say, this is in his book, but and he can speak to it himself. But he said, maybe I ought to. I know that General Westmoreland is asking for 206,000 more troops to put in to widen the war to Cambodia, Laos, up to the northern North Vietnamese border, maybe even into China. I know that that's the plan. And I know that LBJ is about to give him those troops. And so, maybe, maybe I'll do this. He leaked it to the New York Times. Now, you have to realize, those of you who are younger, the New York Times used to be an independent paper, and they would actually publish a story like this without checking it out with the White House, okay? And they did, okay? They did, and someone else leaked, we still don't know who it was, to Neil Sheehan, the New York Times reporter, the fact that Westmoreland was asking for 206,000 more troops. So that request, and what Dan leaked about Sam Adams' figures, namely that most intelligence agencies in Washington thought that there were twice as many enemies as that did it. And LBJ complained to a small group of people in mid-March that the leaks in the New York Times did him in. As LBJ said, I was going to give Westy the 206,000 men, but now I can't do it. We're finished. Vietnam not going to work, okay? And so, you know what happened? Later that month, he decided not to run for re-election and went to negotiations, stopped the bombing. So we have here one successful leaker, and the Pentagon Papers, of course, were icing on the cake. Now, I haven't been watching my watch, but I suspect I've been going for 15 minutes. So let me just, let me just say this, that in honor of Sam Adams, who went to his grave, early grave, 53, completely unexpected heart attack. His continuing ambition was to go back and be a CIA analyst because he loved it so much. The work was so exciting and it was so important. He was ostracized, and he couldn't relieve himself of the thought that if he had gone public back when all this happened, we're talking 67, okay? Abrams' cable was August 20th, 67, where he said, I need to just quote Abrams' cable because this will give you not only an insight into 1967, but into the insight now, okay? And here it is, right before me. Abrams. He was Westmoreland's deputy at the time. Westmoreland was out of Saigon. And he set forth this rationale for not agreeing to Adams's numbers. He said that the new higher numbers, reflecting what everyone else agreed to except the Army, did not reflect the command position. And those of you who have been in the service know that the command position is what's gospel truth. They were, quote, in sharp contrast to the current overall strength figure of about, more or less, 299,000 that we give to the press. Abrams emphasized, quote, now listen to this, folks, and see if you see any resemblances to today. He emphasized, quote, we have been projecting an image of success over recent months, and then he, end quote, then he cautioned that if the higher figures became public, quote, all available caveats and explanations will not prevent the press from drawing an erroneous and gloomy conclusion. There you go, Here's Westmoreland saying, yeah, we're making progress, but it's fragile. It's fragile, and it's, what's the other word? Reversible, it's reversible. And they all did that. McChrystal, Petraeus. If they get another star on them, then, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many young men die. So, in closing, I just suggest that one of the big differences these days is that if we went to the New York Times, and we know this because people did go to the New York Times, or at least to James Risen, and told them that our president was eavesdropping on us without the required judicial warrant. James Risen learned that 4 months before the election in 2004. The New York Times wouldn't let him print it. They went to the White House. White House wouldn't give permission. It wasn't until a year later, 2005, namely December, that the New York Times sort of said, oh, shucks, Risen's book is coming out. He sort of writes for us. It's going to be really embarrassing if he reveals all this in his book. And so they told the White House they were going to publish this. George Bush had Sulzberger and the Washington office chief of the New York Times into the Oval Office and said, don't do it. Don't publish this. This is very bad. And they said, well, you know, we've put it off for a year and a half. We let you win the election, all right? But we can't put it off anymore because Rison's book is in galley. It's coming out in 2 weeks. And so reluctantly, the president said, oh, damn. So they went, oh, he wouldn't say damn. He said, he wouldn't cuss. So they published it. Now, that is really, my point simply is that what we've got now is the kind of obsequious press that will not publish things. And so, in my view, and this I often say is the most important difference, the most important change I've seen in the body politic in my 49 years in Washington, that is that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free press. And that's big. That's the fourth estate, and it's dead. Now, what's the good news? The good news is we've got a fifth estate. And where's the fifth estate? Well, where's the ether? I don't know where I think the ether is up this way, and we have the kind of freedom to publish these things witnessed by Julian Assange and Bradley Manning, and if he is guilty, of course, and what we guilty if he is the hero that we think he is. You know, so that's the good news, and the challenge, in my view, is to harness all these young, imaginative, courageous young folks who know about this stuff and try to figure out a better way to spread the truth around. Sam Adams left a legacy. We set up an annual award called the Sam Adams Associates for Integrity and Intelligence Award. We just gave our 9th and 10th awards just this past November. They went to Jesselyn Radek and Tom Drake, who sit in our audience there. And the awardee the previous year, given by Dan Ellsberg in London, was to a fellow named Julian Assange. So there is hope here, and what we need to do is I think, try to recognize that even the New York Times is not going to spread the truth around. We have to do it. We have to find very imaginative ways to do it. Last thing, I don't want to forget to say this. Occupy. The last thing I want to say is this. People don't really reflect on the implications of what could have happened. Now, how many of you know who Bogdan Zakovich is? Okay, I'm going to tell you. He was the secret supervisory agent in charge of the FAA penetration team to see how successfully they could penetrate airports and airplanes. And he found out in 2000, 2001, that it was easy as pie. 9 out of 10 attempts to penetrate aircraft and airplane and airports was successful. He went to his superiors, they suppressed him. He went to Congress, they suppressed him, and they gave him a job filing things in the bottom of the thing. We went to, that is Colleen Rowley and I went to Bogdan Zakovich, and we said, Bogdan, if WikiLeaks were available to you back in early 2001, frustrated as you were, and knowing the intelligence that indicated that something really bad was going to happen, would you have gone to WikiLeaks? And he said, yes, I would have. Now, that's big, folks. And we were able to sell that story to the LA Times. The LA Times. And you can look at it. It's an op-ed, and I'll give you the date of it when I can find it here. But they published it a year and a half ago. And that's big, because WikiLeaks could have prevented 9/11. And you know what's happened, you know, after 9/11. So this is big stuff. It could not be more important. And I thank you all for being here, and I just feel very honored to be on this panel.